old. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. Okay, I need the energy. I drove this morning while there was no traffic. I'm going to feed off of your energy. Is that okay? Okay, wonderful. So a few things I'd like to say. One, Dr. Hallam, Dr. O, and the planning committee, thank you very much for having me. It is both an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. I do not take the opportunity to speak to my peers and colleagues and students lightly, so I am humbled and honored to be here. Contrary to customary belief, not all professors love the microphone. So I'm not going to stand up here forever. I'm talking, I'm out. A few other things. Dr. Travis, yes, we are old, because exits, bathroom, I'm with you. And if you noticed in Dr. O's speech, first of all, we miss him in New York. We miss his humor. We miss his compassion for the profession. We miss his soft, measured way of speaking, which sounds so zen. We miss that in New York. We don't get enough of that. But if you notice, he likes when people tell him yes. And when people say whatever you want, I heard there was a recurring theme in his remarks. So all of you pay attention. But when he calls, people answer, and people step up, and people show up. So thank you for the invitation. It was not even a question when he called and said, "Warren, I need you to come speak." I didn't know speak where, what, it didn't matter. I said yes. I figured out later. I made the conscious decision not to bring a PowerPoint. I thought about it because there were some very important things visually I might have wanted to capture in conjunction with my talk, but I decided I really wanted my words to stand on their own. So I did not bring a PowerPoint, and I hope I do not make anyone fall asleep. I usually bring people to wake people up if they start to nod off. So again, it is my honor to be with you today at the University of Delaware's first ever social work conference amongst scholars, clinicians, policymakers, and truth tellers like Dr. O. We must create and cultivate spaces for not only continuing education, but also collaborative congregating as thought partners. As it relates to today's talk, this space is important because when we talk about navigating the ripple effects of mental health and substance use disorders across generations and families, we are not just describing clinical phenomenon. We are addressing sacred truths, generational pain, and systems of survival. So I'm not going to go into my background. Dr. O did a wonderful job covering that. But what is important is that I lead practicum education across my university, agency, and community settings. My scholarship really bridges practice, policy, and pedagogy. Most recently focused on the infusion and integration of anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion in field education, and ethical leadership. My through line throughout my scholarship is widening access, elevating underrepresented voices, and advancing equity in how we teach and practice. So I'd like to start with a story, right? And this story is not just from the DSM. It's not from a journal article, but from my life. So born in 1945, my father was a brilliant man. He was a deep thinker. He was a multilingual Army boxer and sniper, who sang, he played the piano. He was complex, he was charming, but he was also damaged. He carried the weight of intergenerational trauma and unresolved pain. He was a man whose substance use was both a numbing agent and an unspoken scream. Addiction wasn't just his problem, it was the gravitational force that shaped my childhood. It taught me how to read silence, it sharpened my empathy, it forced me to grow up in a world where emotional weather could shift without warning. I carried the burden of his addiction, maladaptive coping mechanisms, concurrent medical issues, family dysfunction, and trauma, which manifested as extensive bouts of isolation, a lack of support, and abandonment. I was left trying to understand the world without the input of my father, who lived not too far away, but we'd never really had a relationship. And yet, through all the pain, through all the isolation, all the experiences, all of these things provided a gateway, a direction. Before I became a social worker, I literally worked in the trenches of addiction recovery, always connected to my why, trying to understand addiction so that I can understand my father. I worked in alternatives to incarceration treatment programs, outpatient substance use. I worked with recovering sex offenders. I met mothers grieving their sons, grandmothers raising their grandchildren, teenagers who've aged decades by 17. My clients taught me something that textbooks couldn't. And that was that substance use is never just about the substance. It is about pain, trauma, history, power, and possibility. Today, as a scholar, as a clinician, as a man who's walked through the generational fire, I want to explore 3 interconnected themes today: the ripple, the rupture, and the reclamation. So, everyone knows what a ripple is, right? You ever throw rocks in a lake or drop something in standing water, right? If you've ever done those things, then you know what a ripple is. So consider this definition. A ripple is a particular feeling or effect that spreads through something or someone. In the context of today's talk, the ripple is not just a disturbance in the water, but a parent's untreated trauma. Ripples through the behaviors and emotional health of children and grandchildren, where we understand that addiction, stigma, shame, and silence are not isolated experiences. They are transmitted effectively and relationally within family systems and across institutions. See, ripples don't happen in and of themselves. They don't just happen in a vacuum. Ripples happen in systems, right? In circuits, in family lineages, in the silence between what should be said and what is left unsaid. In my own family, my father's addiction created emotional and relational ripples, disturbances in the current and currency of connection. And as social workers, we must learn to read these ripples, not as personal failings, but as signals of systemic interruption. Whether we see them in a child's coping behavior or in the subtle hesitations of a probation officer untrained in trauma-informed care, these ripples require us to become translators of generational pain and healers of human connection. Mental health and substance use disorders don't start with one person and they don't end with one diagnosis. They ripple across time, across families, across systems. The parent's unresolved trauma becomes a child's coping mechanism. A lack of access to culturally competent care becomes a lifetime of mistrust in institutions. These ripples surface in classrooms, in courtrooms, in foster care and families, and far too often, they live on in silence. When I was thinking about this talk, it made me think about my dissertation, the integration of ADEI and social justice and practicum education. And it had me feeling that, our systems often avoid the very conversations that we most need to have. In the dissertation, it was about race, it was about power and privilege, it was about oppression and trauma. So what I've termed the theory of diversity avoidance is not just about performative DEI, but is about how organizations, including mental health systems, become allergic to accountability. And this conversation about ripples, this conversation about mental health and substance use is no different. When we avoid these conversations, we continue the ripple. We exacerbate the ripple. We do nothing to change, to confront, to fix. I don't project well, so if this mic goes off, we are all in trouble. Okay. So those waves of unresolved trauma, they don't appear out of anywhere. They begin at a center, a moment in time, a place, a person where pain first takes root. And from that center, these ripples move outward, touching everyone in their path. So I'd like to kind of move now from the ripple to what I term the rupture, right? So the rupture is what happens when the ripple goes ignored or unacknowledged. When pain is passed down instead of processed, when silence becomes survival, trust ruptures, families rupture, institutions rupture. In the family systems I've worked with in treatment courts and community mental health and the quiet corners of supervision, these ruptures are rarely simple, they are layered, they are generational, and they are deeply human. Like the mother who was abused by her own mother, like the teenager navigating a bipolar diagnosis while their father serves time, like the probation officer who has never once had a therapist who looked like them. These are not isolated stories, especially for those of you who've been experienced in working in the field. They are fractures in the same foundation. They are cracks formed when pain is inherited instead of understood. Social workers must be trained not only to respond to individual pathology, but to recognize structural trauma. The wounds created by policy, practice, and power. These are invisible forces that shape lives long before a person ever walks through our door. So we have to ask, what happens, or what happened to this family system, right? If we want to understand the ripple or the rupture, we have to ask, what are the histories? What have been the racialized, economic, colonial experiences that still echo in their pain today? And how has that pain been carried, translated, and taught across generations? The image of a ripple, for me, evokes continuity, one small action spreading outward in ever-expanding circles. But sometimes what begins as a ripple in one generation becomes a rupture in the next. As one of 6 children and birthing 8, my paternal grandmother made choices shaped by her context, resilience, and perhaps silence. One of those choices, a ripple in her life, was the withholding of a truth, the identity of her son's biological father, my father. For her, it may have been survival, protection, or simply the way things were done, but that quiet ripple grew unnoticed until it collided with the life of my father while he served in the military. So as an amateur genealogist, I've been doing my family tree and history for 25 years, and the running joke between Dr. O and I is that, we're brothers from another mother. So while in the military, my father started receiving 2 checks, one in the name that he had always known and some random name that he thought was really strange. So, of course he cashed the checks. That wasn't a question, but the question was, who was this strange name on these other set of checks? And after talking to my grandmother, she said, oh, yeah, by the way, that's your dad. So the experience for him, right, this feeling of belonging, this sense of self, right, her ripple created his rupture. Like, who was he? Was he the name that he always thought he was? Or was he the son of some man that he had never known? So this moment illustrates how a ripple, seemingly small action or omission, can build momentum over time and cause a rupture in the next generation's story. It reminds us that unspoken histories don't disappear. They surface eventually and often with force. But rupture isn't just about breakage. It's also about revelation. That disruption created space for redefining, for my father to reckon with who he was beyond the script he inherited. And in so doing, it laid the groundwork for how I understand legacy, silence, and truth. So I've had to hold my own grief as a son, working with fathers in treatment. I've had to hold the complexity of watching my father struggle, and the gift of becoming the version of him that healed. So, but this story isn't about pain. It isn't about the lack of process. It isn't just about his maladaptive coping and his substance use as a result of his lifetimes of trauma. It's also about reclamation. Because I stand here today not only as someone from a family touched by addiction, but as a first-generation college student, as a first-generation doctoral holder, the second doctor in a family of 813 names doing my family tree. And that's not a statistic, that's a miracle. And even more important, if you've seen my high school transcript, that's what reclamation looks like. In my work in practicum education, I advocate for what I call relational liberation, right? Rooted in relational cultural theory, it's the belief that healing isn't only internal, it's interpersonal. We heal through connection, not avoidance. Liberation happens in relationship when we face one another with honesty, empathy, and courage. Because when we avoid the hard conversations about bias, structural racism, or institutional betrayals, we don't maintain peace, we break connection. And that's what I call a relational failure. When we choose comfort over courage, silence over dialogue, or when institutions protect their image instead of their people, relationships fall. Relational rupture isn't just a professional lapse, it's a moral one. Each time we turn away from truth, we reinforce the very systems we claim to dismantle. At its heart, the ripple can be redirected, the rupture can be repaired. But only if we lead with honesty, if our practices are trauma-informed, racially literate, and rooted in truth. Only if we teach our students and our colleagues to hold both pain and possibility, to make room for both grief and growth, because healing doesn't happen by accident. It happens with intention, by relationship, and by the courage to stay connected when it would be easier to turn away. So I ask you all today, not as a keynote speaker, but as someone whose childhood bore witness to addiction and trauma, whose early career was shaped by family systems under siege, and whose scholarship is rooted in justice. What ripple are you willing to interrupt? What rupture are you willing to repair? What story are you reclaiming? In the Akan tradition of West Africa, we are taught the wisdom of Sankofa, to go back and to get what was lost, to reach behind us in order to move forward. It reminds us that what we do not heal by forgetting, we can by remembering. We do not transform by severing, but by retrieving. So I've shared with you a piece of my story, one shaped by a father's addiction, a family's grief, and a son's journey to become a healer, educator, and witness. But this is not just my story. It's a reflection of the stories we all carry. The stories of resilience, hidden inside rupture, of potential tucked inside pain, of healing still waiting to happen across generations. For me, those generations persist from a mainly African ancestry, so I absolutely know that Dr. O and I are related. So I ask you, as I prepare to close, to carry this story with you, not as a souvenir, but a seed of accountability, a seed of remembrance, a seed that asks, how will you take what you've heard and water it in your own work, in your own family, and in your own communities? So, may those of us who are educators and practitioners reach back and teach the next generation of social workers deep in this room that healing runs in families, right? And so does silence. And may we always choose to break the silence to recover from the wounds that cut us. So let us leave here not only inspired, but responsible. Right? Let us become the ripple of healing that interrupts harm. Let us say the names. Let us tell the stories. Let us build the bridges our ancestors dreamed of. May we leave the conference not just more informed, but more accountable, addressing the intergenerational issues that move through generations of families to emphasize rupture to resilience, storytelling, family legacy, and healing. Ashe, and thank you.